Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Today I'm going to talk about the origin of nudges and also the nudgeless you, which is the true you. When it comes to discovering the origin of nudges, from where they come from, if you were to ask 99% of the world, the answer is very clear where nudges come from. And the nudges I'm talking about is this internal nudge that you feel inside yourself whenever you encounter a particular situation or a particular action from people. And if you were to ask 99% of the world where the origins of nudges come from, they would come up with a very clear and unquestionable answer to the origins of nudges. And really, you can define it in 6 ways, which are the most common ways people or the world will describe where the origins of nudges come from. And the first one would be that nudges come from what people do. So the particular actions people do, this is what triggers the nudge inside you. And if they didn't do what they do, then you wouldn't feel this nudge. So that is the cause of this of you feeling and experiencing this nudge. The second, if you were to ask the world, where is the origins of nudges, this internal nudging process, they would say it's from what people don't do. So it's what people don't do, and it's because of what they don't do, this is what causes this internal nudge within me. And if they didn't not do what they didn't do, then I wouldn't feel this internal nudge. The third way is from what people say. If it wasn't for what people say, then I wouldn't feel this internal nudge that I feel within myself, and that is the cause of the nudge. It's what people say. And if you ask the world again, the fourth way would be what people don't say. This is the cause of the nudge. It's what people don't say that births this nudge inside myself that I can feel and experience. And if people didn't not say what they didn't not say, then I wouldn't feel this nudge inside myself. The fifth way is what happens in life in a particular situation. So if you ask the world what causes the nudging process, they would say it's because of what happens in the world in situations, and if this didn't happen, then I wouldn't feel this nudge, and this is the cause of the nudging process. And the sixth way is what didn't happen in the world or in the situation. And because of what didn't happen in the world and the situation, this is what birthed this nudging process inside myself. And if it didn't happen the way it happened, then I wouldn't feel this nudging process within myself. So just in summarizing the 6 unquestioned definitions of the origin of nudging, it is what people say, what people don't say, what people do, what people don't do, what happens in a situation, and what doesn't happen in a situation. These are the 6 origins and only possible causes to the birth of this nudging process that I feel inside myself. This is where it comes from. And when you conduct a self-inquiry and an investigation within yourself, you'll see that all these 6 reasons, that none of them are true. The nudging process comes because you've forgotten who you are, because you've identified with the mind and you've mistaken that as who you are. And this is why this nudging process comes into place and is birthed. It comes in a nanosecond as soon as the forgetfulness of who you are arises within you. And whenever you feel this nudging process, what it is that's being nudged isn't you, but it's the conceptual self. It's the identity that is formed out of mental ideas. It's the bundle of mental ideas in which your no-thing consciousness identifies with and confuses itself as who it is. This conceptual self is the one that's subject to nudging, not you. Who you are is incapable of being nudged. Whenever you experience a nudge, the nudge shakes up all the conceptual ideas that your consciousness has become identified with. This is what causes the continual shifting and changing of the conceptual self, which is the deleting of conceptual ideas, the adding of conceptual ideas, the enhancement of conceptual ideas, which make up this identity, this conceptual identity. And it is part of the grand intelligence of this universe to do this. In the end, it's this continually rattling and disturbance of the changing conceptual self that eventually brings you to the realization that you are not this conceptual self, that you are the witness to it. And sometimes it is the case that a situation in life, or perhaps an action of another person, brings about such a dramatic nudge within you that it absolutely rocks every conceptual idea that your no-thingness consciousness has become identified with. It shatters to pieces all these mental conceptual ideas until nothing is left. And when nothing is left, the enlightenedness that you already are arises to the surface and is experienced. This is sometimes referred to as the peace of God that defies all understanding. It's very, very rare that this happens to people. They go through such a very challenging situation where the mind generates a judgment to this situation, and a very big judgment to this situation. It brings about an opportunity to create a massive nudge to the conceptual self. And sometimes it does nudge the conceptual self, and sometimes just in the moment when it is about to nudge the conceptual self, the no-thingness consciousness that you are wakes up to itself, to the realization of itself, amidst this potential nudge which is about to happen or which has happened. The other way the direction can go is if you have, which everyone has experienced to some degree, has experienced a massive nudge where there's been a very, very big challenging situation that's come from another person or a situation, from what happened, what didn't happen, what someone said, what someone didn't say, what someone did and what someone didn't do. The mind makes its judgment, and the no-thingness consciousness that you are does not awaken to this, to see the judgment for what it is and recognize the conceptual self that is being nudged. And in this instance, another layer of conceptual ideas is added to the identity. And this layer is a bad flavoured idea. It's a resentful flavoured idea, and it adds to the identity of who you think you are. The good news is, though as these negative flavoured mental ideas get added to your conceptual identity, which then make birth a corresponding feeling of struggle, an increasing corresponding feeling of struggle every time a new negative conceptual label is identified with. This increasingly intensifying struggling feeling, which is birthed out of more and more conceptual labels added to your identity, which your consciousness is not aware of yet, which is mistaking it for its identity, which because it hasn't recognized the origin of nudges yet, then it eventually builds such a struggle, then even this can cause a collapse. So really, that's the good news. Even though you may continue your life in the process of building this struggle, it's the destiny of this building struggle process to inevitably collapse the structure that it is built upon. And when it collapses, the enlightenedness that you already are becomes revealed. So for some people, it just happens at one particular point of their life. For other people, it happens a little bit later on. And some people don't even seem to go through that whole process of this adding of conceptual identity, adding of concepts to the conceptual identity. They just somehow, the consciousness just realizes itself early on. I can go into many explanations about why, and theories possible why this could happen, such as possibly you've already learned this in a past lifetime and it's ready. But ultimately, that's the true reason why it does happen, because it is ready to. It is said to some extent, your awakeness is already written, but it is also said that there are infinite doorways to your awakening. It's similar to a choose your own adventure book. You can it's almost like there's an active choice on your behalf, that when you reach the end of the chapter, you have a decision of what you want to do, and that leads to other chapters in the book. And there's infinite potential chapters in this book, but all the chapters are contained in the one book. So in that perspective, it is already written, but there are infinite pathways to this written book. And what can generate an acceleration to the realization of who you truly are, which is this nudgeless self that cannot be nudged, has never been nudged, and is incapable of being nudged, is, as described in the previous video, is bringing a smile to the nudging process and seeing if it is possible to absolutely not mind this nudging process. What would happen if you truly not minded this nudging process? If it were to arise and you could feel it and you didn't mind it, what would happen to it? And that's something to test for yourself, to explore. And as I said before, start off with little challenging situations of what people do, what people don't do, what people say and don't say, what happens and doesn't happen. Start with little challenging situations where you feel this little internal nudge, and practice on that. And see if you can see the mind's judgment that is being projected onto these life situations, on what people do, don't do, say, don't say, what happens and doesn't happen. And if you can notice the judgment And if you can notice the situation of what people do and don't do, etc., and see if it is possible to see what people and don't do, which is the life situation and what happens and doesn't happen, to see if it is possible to see that is neutral, that it is not the cause of the nudge, that the nudge is actually caused from your consciousness not being aware of the judgment that is being projected onto life. And this is self-inquiry. As I've said before, this self-inquiry process is a natural process that happens to everyone. To deliberately practice self-inquiry and to become good at it, to see if you can engage this process at the post office when you're at the queue and other light challenging situations, it eventually can accelerate this process of bringing about the nudgeless truth of who you are. And one of the most fastest ways to discover the nudgeless truth of who you are is to use the nudge. The very thing that can add more nudges by following the mind's judgments to nudges and increasing the nudges and perpetuating the cycle of further nudges, you use the very thing which is the nudge to wake you up. And this is another perspective on the gift of nudges. Nudges can be used in two ways. They can be used by your consciousness to identify with your mind's judgments to them and generate further nudges, or you can observe and become the witness to your mind's judgments to life situations and see the neutrality of life, which is what people do and don't do and what happens and doesn't happen, and separate the two. Here is the mind's judgment and here is the life situation. Life situation is neutral and here is the mind's judgment about the life situation. And when you do this, when you can have distinction of separation between the two, where you can sift and separate the two, then you'll be able to see the neutrality of life, of what people do, don't do, what happens and what doesn't happen. It is a bit more challenging to do what I'm talking about here when another person is in their mind and their action is coming from a mind-based process, a reactive process. It has a tendency to draw you into the same based process where your mind wants to also contribute to the judgments about what they're doing. So this can be a lot more difficult, but that's why I say start with very light things first. And as you get your first experiences of seeing this neutrality that I'm talking about, where you're able to sift out the mind's judgments from life situations and see, yes, I can see this is neutral. And you do it in light situations and practice on that first. When you do this, your awareness grows. And your ability to have distinction between you and mind also grows. To become aware of the mind and its judgments and recognize the familiar patterns that the mind follows. How it usually, particular situations of what people say and don't do, trigger certain judgment remarks by the mind. And notice the repetitiveness of the mind. How it always says exactly the same things over and over again. Notice the predictability of the mind. It might be a different person, but it's always the same flavour of what the person's doing that triggers the same flavour of judgments and a corresponding flavour of judgments. So this is the self-inquiry process, and through the self-inquiry process, it can accelerate for you to discover the nudgeless truth of who you are. Who you are has never been nudged. It is incapable of being nudged. And it's never in history has it ever happened, and it never will happen. That's not to be believed in, because when you're in the conceptual self and you think you are the conceptual self, then what I just said is a lie. It's only through discovering the truth of who you are shall you discover the truth that you are nudgeless, that it is only the conceptual self which becomes nudged, and it feels the nudging process. It is the experiencer of the nudging process, and you are the witnesser to all these. When you be able to see this within yourself, the nudging process begins to reveal its impersonalness. And that's where the smile arises evermore. If it is possible to bring a smile to a nudge, do it on small nudges first and not mind it. And don't do it in a sort of narcissistic way, or I don't know how to sort of describe it, in a way that's a glutton for punishment type of way. What I'm talking about is realizing that the nudge is impersonal. You're not trying to believe that to be true. You're trying to see that to be true. There's a difference here, what I'm talking about. You're not trying to drum up some fluffy ideas to make you see the world differently and hold on to these fluffy ideas in a vain attempt to keep your life light and fluffy. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, can you actually see that the nudge is neutral? It has absolutely nothing to do with who you are. That it was just simply generated because your consciousness followed the mind. Just in that moment. It was all just a simple misunderstanding, just in that moment. Can you just forgive yourself in that moment? So what? You followed the mind. So what? The mind came in the background and generated a bit of a nudge, and maybe you externalize that nudge back to the person or back out to the situation in some way, such as frustration or some other form of negativity. All forms of nudges that you feel within yourself, and all forms of reactivity to the nudges which get projected out to the world, to people and situations, they're all innocent and neutral. It's all part of a misunderstanding of who you are. And this is part of the cosmic game, the cosmic joke. When you can see this process over and over and over again, and you learn to not mind it, and understand and see that it's just a temporary forgetfulness of who you are that gives birth to this nudge. It has nothing to do with the situation, and has nothing to do with other people. And this is where you find absolute freedom from the world, and ultimately freedom from the nudging process. And when you find freedom from the nudging process, the truth of who you are will arise naturally without any effort on your behalf. Use the nudging process, for it is the greatest gift. Through the nudging process, you will discover the truth of who you are. And I will add, it is pretty much only through the nudging process that we can discover who we are, the truth of who we are. If you read books about self-inquiry, that's good, but ultimately you have to wait for the nudging process to happen to you, and for you to practice some sort of self-inquiry process to it. Some sort of smiling towards the nudging process, and see what happens. It's in the act of smiling to the nudge that you experience the nudgeless you. So yeah, try this out for yourself. Try it on little things, experiment, play with it. And when you get the taste of what I'm talking about, when you feel a little bit freer, a little bit lighter, where the nudges don't come so much anymore, where the mind doesn't produce as much of these repetitive judgments anymore, when you can see the repetitive triggering responses to the judgments more distinctively, with more awareness, when all these things come into play into your awareness of what triggers it, what is the predictable response, what are the typical judgments that the mind produces, having a distinction between you and mind, that you are not the mind, that you are the one that witnesses the mind, and ultimately that you are the one that not minds the mind and allows the mind to do whatever it wants. and that you don't mind the mind. And when you get to that experience of not minding the mind ceases in its activity, and it reduces in its activity. In my personal experience over the last few years since I've been doing self-inquiry, my mind's probably reduced by about 98% in its judgments. So now I don't even have to do any self-inquiry. It's just I just live life. I drive, I interact with people, I don't interact with people, I don't drive. Whatever I do or don't do, there's no more of this stuff going on in the background. So life, I don't try to be effortless or peaceful. I already am that, because there's just no more judgments in the background which present themselves an opportunity to become identified with, which then birth a nudge within myself. Nudge, another word for nudge is struggle, and there's no more struggles because there's no more of the mind activity, as I said, which has an opportunity to become identified with. And even if there is still, which there is, still mind activity going on within me, probably 80% of it doesn't matter. Even if it's still going on in the background, if I want to, I could pretty much make it stop just by bringing my focus and attention to it and realizing that I am this focus and attention. But most of the day I just live. There's nothing I need to do. And in the rare occasion where the mind does produce a judgment, and it's a particular judgment that has not been brought to my level of awareness yet, and I become identified with it, and it produces a nudge, and I may externalize that nudge to other people or situations, there's no self-beat up in me where the mind's again throwing a judgment about you shouldn't have done that, or whatever. And even if it does do that, which is very rare, it doesn't take long, within a few seconds, to notice the mind doing it again. And this is effortless reality, where you don't have to do anything. There's nothing to deal with, and there's nothing to process as much anymore when the mind's just producing all these judgments. And as I said before, the mind's not your enemy. The only reason why it does it is because it's part of the divine plan to make you, it's encouraging you to see the mind for what it is, and amidst that you discover yourself more than ever before. It's through the confusion of yourself with mind that the rediscovery of who yourself unfolds and becomes revealed to you effortlessly without any doing on your behalf. So this is all part of the it's all part of the divine game. So yeah, give it a go, and yeah, and if yeah, send some comments and let me know some feedbacks as well. Thank you.